What will happen in 2025? Global Trends 2025, A Transformed World, was published in November of 2008 by the Office of the Director of the National Intelligence Council. As The Guardian pointed out on November 20th of 2008, the National Intelligence Council, quote, has warned that the world is entering an increasingly unstable and unpredictable period, in which the advance of Western-style democracy is no longer assured. After giving thanks to the Atlantic Council for its fourth installment of their Trends forecast, they describe previous installments as, quote, interesting and influential. Their stated goal is, quote, to identify key drivers and developments likely to shape world events a decade or more in the future. For 2025, Global Trends gives another bleak picture of Western nations. Quote, the Western model of economic liberalism, democracy, and secularism may lose its luster. Today, wealth is moving not just from west to east, but is concentrating more under state control. They go on to predict that, quote, the international system, as constructed following the Second World War, will be almost unrecognizable by 2025, owing to the rise of emerging powers, a globalizing economy, an historic transfer of relative wealth and economic power from west to east, and the growing influence of non-state actors. The publication defines non-state actors as, quote, businesses, tribes, religious organizations or movements, criminal networks, and superpowered individuals. As far as state actors go, quote, growth projections for Brazil, Russia, India, and China, the BRICS, indicate they will collectively match the original G7 share of global GDP. The NIC's publication describes, quote, relative certainties for the future matched with a, quote, likely impact. One describes a relative certainty of, quote, a global multiplayer system emerging with the rise of China, India, and others. The relative power of non-state actors also will increase, with a likely impact saying, quote, by 2025, a single international community composed of nation-states will no longer exist. Power will be more dispersed, with the newer players bringing new rules to the game that will, quote, challenge the Western order. They say China, India, and Russia are, quote, not following the Western liberal model for self-development, but instead are using a different model, state capitalism, also known as fascism or communism. They go on to detail this new world order, stating, quote, the most salient characteristics of the new order will be the shift from a unipolar world dominated by the United States to a relatively unstructured hierarchy of old powers and rising nations, and the diffusion of power from state to non-state actors. As their own publication explains, quote, it uses scenarios to illustrate some of the many ways in which the drivers examined in the study may interact to generate challenges and opportunities for future decision makers. One of those drivers Global Trends 2025 illustrates is a global coronavirus pandemic. On page 75, it begins to read as a plot summary, an exact play-by-play of the novel coronavirus 2019 pandemic, written 12 years before the Wuhan virus began its plague. Under the chapter title, Potential Emergence of a Global Pandemic, it reads, quote, the emergence of a novel, highly transmissible human respiratory illness for which there are no adequate countermeasures could initiate a global pandemic. If a pandemic disease emerges by 2025, internal and cross-border tension and conflict will become more likely as nations struggle to control the movement of populations. Experts consider highly pathogenic avian influenza strains to be likely candidates, but other pathogens, such as the SARS coronavirus or other influenza strains, also have this potential. If a pandemic disease emerges, it probably will first occur in an area marked by high population density and close association between humans and animals, such as many areas of China, where human populations live in close proximity to livestock. To propagate effectively, a disease would have to be transmitted to areas of higher population density. Weeks might pass before definitive laboratory results could be obtained, confirming the existence of a disease with pandemic potential. Despite limits imposed on international travel, travelers with mild symptoms or who were asymptomatic could carry the disease to other continents. Waves of new cases would occur every few months. The absence of an effective vaccine and near universal lack of immunity would render populations vulnerable to infection. U.S. and global health organizations currently are working to develop vaccines that may prevent or mitigate influenza pandemics. Even the vaccine solution to the coronavirus pandemic is offered by the NIC in their Global Trends 2025 publication. How did they predict this event so accurately? And why do publications from both Deagle.com and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence predict the collapse of Western nations, the rise of BRIC nations, and blatant threats to human life worldwide? What other publications predict doom and gloom changes for 2025? This is Brian